In this lesson we are going to learn about reverb. Now I'm sure we've all played with reverb plugins, and obviously they mimic a real live reverberation in a real space, which is great for us, seeing as with our 4D mixing space that's exactly what we're trying to achieve. Now they're also one of the plugins that can cause a lot of mud. That is a big problem, especially in the lower frequencies, but we'll look at how to counteract that a bit later. But in this lesson we're just going to look at the controls that you need to know in reverb plugins. Different plugins are all slightly different, of course, but they all include the same core controls. And we're also going to look at how reverb controls elements within our mixing space and when we would want to use reverb. So reverb plugins are actually one of the most powerful in so much as they control all four of the dimensions in the 4D mixing space. So they control depth, they control frequency, they control stereo image, and they can control time. This is why they're so powerful. So let's hop into the DAW and have a look. Okay, so here we have the loop that we've been working with in this part of the course.
To be free, got to be free, got to come together as one family.
So I'm soloing the vocals and we're going to look at reverb on those. So here you can see I've set up already using a compressor. I've added some compression. I've also taken the volume down with the utility plugin, just like using the makeup gain knob really. I've added some EQ after the compression to get rid of the unwanted bass frequencies and to just boost the top a bit, making it shine a bit in the mix. So let's add some reverb. So this is the Ableton Live Reverb plugin. As I said, all reverb plugins have pretty much the same core controls. So let's have a quick look at them. First, you've got the dry wet knob, that's standard. So you've got your dry signal, and fully wet is the fully reverberated signal with none of the original dry signal. So it's just like a mixer knob. The second control that you will have is decay time, and that basically says how long the reverb tail takes to die off back to silence. So you can have a really short one. Let's just put that up.
To be free, got to be free, got to come together as one family.
Or you can have a really long one.
To be free, got to be free,
So that will take 14.1 seconds to now completely die off to silence. Okay, the other control that you will have is the pre-delay. So what reverb plugins are doing, as I mentioned in the intro to this video, is recreating a real space in real life. And the pre-delay is basically the amount of time it takes for the first echo to come back off the walls. So you can have a really short pre-delay and then the reverberation starts instantly.
To be free.
Let's bump up the decay time to make it easier to hear.
To be free, got to be free.
And if we up the pre-delay, there'll be a slight delay as the echo bounces back off that wall to your ears.
To be free, got to be free, got to come together as one family. Got to be free.
So that is how we can create the illusion of a real space. You might also have a room size control, which is simply the size of the room or hall. And you might also have a shape control, which is saying how many walls the room has. So for instance, if you were in a room that just had 4 walls, the reverb would sound different from if you were in a room with 8 walls, as all the angles would be different as the sound bounces back to you. Now all of these other controls do different things, and other plugins will have comparable controls, but here for instance you've got low cut, and that simply cuts out the low frequencies of the reverberated signal, and some other controls here as well that just help shape that sound a bit. But the other way in which to use reverb, which we're going to go into in a lot more depth, is to use it on a send channel. There are other names for these channels, like an auxiliary channel or a bus, but it all means the same thing. Basically, you have a reverb set up on an auxiliary channel in your mixer, So here's one I set up earlier. And then you use the send knobs on your mixer to send some of your dry signal to the channel which the reverb is on. And it's very important to make sure that the reverb plugin is set to 100% wet, so none of the dry signal is coming through onto the sends channel. And we'll quickly dip into the benefits now, but I'll show you more later.
To be free, got to be free, got to come together as one family, got to be free.
So now I've got that signal going to this extra channel, this separate channel.
To be free,
I can EQ the reverb separately,
got to come together as one family.
and that is how you can get rid of the mud in the mix. Now this is also a great way to make it sound like all of your instruments are in the same space. If you've got a different reverb set up on every different channel that you want some reverberation, it just becomes a washed out mess and it's unrealistic. So if you think about it, all of our instruments, be they synthesizers, drum machines, vocals, they're all supposed to be in this one 4D mixing space. So if we have 15 different reverbs set up, two things are going to happen. We're going to get a lot of mud and clashing frequencies that are completely unneeded, and we're also going to completely destroy the illusion of all of our instruments sitting in one place. Now, if all the settings look a bit overwhelming and you don't know where to start, don't worry, we are going to look at how to set up the perfect mixing template in a later lesson, which will include how to set up your reverb to sound as good as possible for your particular mix. If you look at these two diagrams, on the left, this shows you what happens if you use reverb incorrectly. Now on the right, this is what it should look like if you're using it correctly. So all of the sounds still cut through. And as I said, there are other ways that we're going to look at a bit later, but that is the goal, to maintain clarity of our sounds whilst giving the impression that they're in a real space, without making it muddy and washed out. Now I said we'd also look at why you would want to use reverb. So we've already covered how it makes things sound further back in the mix. So the less reverb you have,
To be free,
that sounds close to the front of the stage.
to come together as one family.
Add more reverb, it sounds further back.
To be free.
And the longer the pre-delay, the further away it's going to sound. Okay, so that's depth. Frequency. You can already hear how we can control the frequency with reverb as well.
To be free, got to be free, got to come together as one family.
Especially if you are not using an auxiliary channel or a send reverb.
Got to be free, got to come together as one family.
So you can hear the difference it's making in frequency as well. Now the third dimension of stereo space, again you can hear for yourself, it's adding information in the stereo field from a mono signal
To be free,
right in the middle.
got to be free, got to come together as one.
So that's how reverb can control the stereo image. And the fourth one, time, again,
To be free, got to be free, got to come together.
and that is one of the uses where you can end up making a lot of mud if you don't do it correctly. But we've got some other tools that we can use to help, as I said, counteract some of these potential issues with reverb. So we'll look at those in the later lessons. Now, if you didn't before, you should understand everything you need to know about reverb now and how it relates to the mixing space. So in the next lesson, we are going to look at reverb's little brother, delay.